nearly kill myself coming down the steps into the lecture theatre. It's steep and I'm hungover, feeling delicate as one does, but I really want to hear Professor Connell's lecture on Heidegger, because for once I've read the book. I'm hoping Niamh is here too, so that I can apologise. I pan the audience. I'm holding onto benches, negotiating the ridiculous rake of the steps. There's no rail. I make my way toward Niamh, feeling geriatric. I'm 22 years old. That's one thing about alcohol that I've never heard said. You learn to feel for others who are damaged. I'm sorry, I say to Niamh, Connor Darcy beside her, taking me in out of the corner of his eye. Go away, Aidan, she says. I don't want to see you anymore. I didn't mean it, I say. Look, I was drunk. I was just spouting off. It's not the first time you said it, says Niamh. I just don't want to hear it anymore. What? What did I say? What do you mean, she says. She's looking at me in disbelief, her lips parted, her eyes chiding. It's dawning on her that I don't remember what I said. You said, she says, that you had no respect for domesticity right when I'm serving you a tasty dinner in a nice, clean, warm house, and you go on to pontificate about how you've no interest in having babies because population control is so important. Niamh, I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry. Darcy grins, and his ears seem to swell with glee, drinking in my humiliation like it's, well, beer, or whatever he's having. Look, she says, I'm looking for something different, that's all, so let's just forget about it, okay? I can see she means it. I'm standing there like a complete dope. There's no point in arguing. She's right. She's way ahead of me. I suddenly realised that everyone in this lecture theatre is probably way ahead of me. They all did their drinking and riding and drugging in high school while I was a monk in a monastery. Now I'm out, being degenerate every chance I get, and they're plotting careers and having babies. She has already turned her back on me and is giggling with Darcy. I nearly kill myself again climbing the steps. When I do find a seat, I have to move again because from that angle, all I can see is Niamh's breast under her arm. I mean, there's a million sights to behold in this room, but all I can see is the baby's delight. Kinda exhausting being a young man. I eventually find a seat way up where I can't see her at all. Professor Connell is a priest who becomes Archbishop of Dublin 10 years after this. He's a tall, abstracted kind of guy, baby face, head in the clouds. He stands at the podium nodding and bestowing smiles. His skin is too white, like it's been bleached. I don't know how many students there are in the theatre, 200 maybe. It's a crowd. Connell adjusts his mic and begins. Why are there things that are rather than nothing? He says. Now, when I'm sober, I love that kind of question. But being in the haze of a hangover, the question smacks me in the head like a door on a spring. Connell looks around the auditorium as if he's examining each of us individually. When his eyes find me, I try to hide. I scribble the question on my notepad to avoid his gaze. As I said, I was a monk before this. That was more strange than I knew then. The isolation was strange. The education was strange. I mean, we read the books we had to for state exams, for example, but there was no library in our school. Knowledge was suspect. We were focused on spiritual growth, so wide reading wasn't the point. Peace was the point. We meditated, we chanted the Psalms, we examined the virtues, we fasted, gave alms, prepared to be of service. And that was wonderful up to a point. I was happy and, in a sense, advanced as a human being. But when I lost my faith, I realised I was just plain ignorant. One of the worst red specimens of humanity this side of an empty tin can. So, here I am now in university, truly reading for the first time. And what am I reading? Being and Time by Martin Heidegger. Ulysses by James Joyce. The Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus by Ludwig Wittgenstein. These, never having been read to as a child, or never having read Alice in Wonderland or Dr. Seuss or anything even vaguely playful. It was like being fucked into the ocean, having never paddled in a kiddie's pool. One specific effect of this was to make me think of learning in a strange way. Learning was not about having information. Learning was about knowing how to live. This, maybe not surprisingly, made me an avid learner but a bad academic. I tune into Connell as he is quoting Heidegger. Quote, "The essence of Dasein lies in its to be. Its being what it is, essentia, must, so far as we can speak of it at all, be conceived in terms of its being, existentia. But here, our ontological task is to show that when we choose to designate the being of this entity as existence, this term does not and cannot have the ontological signification of the traditional term existentia. Ontologically, existentia is tantamount to being present at hand, a kind of being which is essentially inappropriate to entities of Dasein's character." End quote. Now, my mother used to call me stupid, so I might have a bit of a complex about it. For example, I was in her friend's house one day. I think I was about 10, and our friend offered me a boiled egg. And I said, "What's a boiled egg?" And my mother nearly freaked. "Aidan, don't be such a fool. A boiled egg! A boiled egg! You'd think I never fed you." I think I was confused between a boiled egg and a poached egg, which is also boiled, isn't it? Anyway, why are there things that are rather than nothing? Connell at this point is talking about Heidegger's reading of Descartes and how Descartes doesn't really get it, how his understanding of being is just chatter about what is proximally at hand. Descartes seems to trust the senses, but Heidegger doesn't think reality is as accessible as all that. Despite my efforts to follow the lecture, I can't stop thinking about Niamh. I decide to change seats again so that I can see her. When I do lay eyes on her, it's like a caress for my clenched heart. Or no, that's not it. She is more both balm and blade. The cut comes when I see Darcy making her laugh. It's like the knife is poisoned when I see him touching her shoulder with his forehead, lounging on her. It's obvious he's sleeping with her. I want to kill him. I want to crush his well-fed face. My blood is like rushing water in a canyon. It's definitely poison. I have been inhabited by something I don't recognise. I stretch. I put my hand in the air as if that will help, like a stretch helps relieve a cramp. Professor Connell gestures in my direction. "You have a question," he says. No, I say. Then, yes, maybe I do. Wasn't Heidegger a Nazi? Now, it wasn't my intention to cause trouble. I had this question on my mind, but hadn't intended to ask it at that moment. The thing is, I have to mention this detail. I know this is a Dublin university, but I might be the only one here with a Dublin accent, so it sticks out. I'm a working class lad amidst the bourgeoisie. My concerns are not the concerns of bankers' sons. The place goes silent. The benches creak as everyone turns to look at me. I'm on the spot, as they say. "I think you might be right," says Professor Connell. I think Heidegger joined the party to protect his recent appointment at the University of Freiburg. He pauses. "This is a little unrelated to what we're talking about today," says Connell, "but did you have something you wanted to say about the unfortunate affiliation?" "I was worried when I read about it," I say. "I wondered if this pointed to a fundamental flaw in his thinking. This causes ripples in the room, coughs, sniffs, whispers, trouble the air. I worried," I go on, not really sure about what I'm saying. It worried me that the arcane language could comfortably coexist with the thuggery and horror without making reference to that horror. That the arcane language might even be a cover for the horror. "Well," says Connell, "this was 1933, some time before anyone was aware of just how horrible the Nazis were. Brecht went into exile in 1933, I say. Jews throughout Europe were well aware of the emerging horrors, and why was Gunter Grass's parody of Heidegger so vicious in Dog Years?" "I'm not familiar with Dog Years," says Connell. At this point there are several hands in the air. "Mr. Darcy," says Connell, "you're taking the bait." "Well," says Darcy, "I'd like to take the bait off the hook and put an end to this fishing expedition. Give it a go, Mr. Darcy, says Professor Connell. Martin Heidegger, says Darcy, is one of the most sublime thinkers in the history of philosophy. That he happened to be alive in dark times was no fault of his. That he espoused thuggery is a fault of his, blurts a Cork accent from down low in the raked seats. She's a redhead, standing, her bony shoulders tense and leaning forward. She's holding a pencil like she would stab you with it. And don't his black notebooks say awful things about Jews? She goes on. Professor Connell, says Darcy. Professor Connell, I am speaking. I have the floor. Yes, please, ladies and gentlemen, please, let us speak one at a time. Mr. Darcy has the floor. The point is, says Darcy, that unscrupulous political actors can manipulate whatever they want for their own sordid ends. The Nazis sullied so much great art and so much fine thinking on their way to power. But, says the Cork girl, her hair bouncing like a frayed rope off the side of a busy boat. But, she says, didn't Heidegger himself point to Hitler as the embodiment of his philosophy? Professor Connell, didn't Heidegger do that? He didn't need to do that. Connell is standing there like a man watching a volcano bubble and spit. I read about dog ears, says some joker up the back. It's dog years, you dope, says Darcy. It's your Heideggerian cliff notes that are dog-eared. There's one chapter, the joker goes on, where the Nazis on the battlefield are communicating using Heideggerian language. Dasein is present at hand on the ontological horizon. I'm staring at Neve, my temples throbbing. The blood has drained from Connell's face. Darcy is standing, arms wide, palms up, mute against the riot of irreverence. Isn't that the point? Squeaks the Cork girl. Isn't that the point? Highbrow obscurantism is often a cover for criminal horror. And yes, that does point to a fundamental flaw in the preposterous tangle of language that Heidegger creates. The joker is still on his walkie-talkie. Dasein suffering thrownness on the Western Front. For the love of facticity, send in the fucking tanks. Professor Connell, says Darcy. Professor Connell. His hand in the air, the gesture wanting only to draw attention, perhaps, but looking suspiciously like a salute. A paper plane floats past my head with a swastika on the wing. It wobbles, suspended on the updraft from warm bodies, seeking its target like a missile, landing, finally, at Connell's feet. Darcy and Neve are looking at me as if to say, look what you caused. What are you going to do now? I stand, way too fast, and reel toward fainting. I catch Connell's eye, mirroring his pallor. We are both in the same boat, the swell sickening, the shore out of sight. With an effort, I remain standing, gripping the gunwale of the bench. Existence is an experiment in love, I whisper to myself. Then, why not? I say it out loud. Existence is an experiment in love, I announce. And the Nazis failed the test. Did Heidegger fail the test, Professor? I don't know, son, says Connell. But I think it's a good question. It's a better question, says the court girl. It's a better question than why are there things that are rather than nothing. It's just a different question, says Darcy. This is a class in ontology, not social studies for kindergartners. Nobody can answer the question, says the court girl. So what's the point of asking it? It's a fundamental philosophical inquiry, says Darcy. It's an authoritarian tool to mystify, screeches the court girl. And it covers up and even justifies the crimes and horrors of those very authoritarians. Now, am I in love or just horny? Either way, I have to focus on staying upright. If I let go of the bench, I'm dead. Next week, says Connell, gathering his notes, we'll look at why Wittgenstein thinks that question which inspires so much awe in Heidegger. We'll look at why Wittgenstein thinks the question is literally nonsense. I'm still holding onto the bench for dear life when the court girl passes behind me on her way out. You okay? She says. Could be worse, I say. It's not often an ontology class is as exciting as that, she says. I wish I had been in better shape, I say. I might have been able to bolster your arguments. Oh, I don't need bolstering, she says. But maybe we could try an experiment in love at some point. I'm not used to that kind of forwardness, so I must look kind of startled. I'd like that, I say. Will you be okay, or will I give you a hand, she says. I think for now I'll just stand here bolstering the bench. She says. I'll seek you out. I'll consider myself sought, I say, as she springs lightly up the steps and disappears. She, of course, is another story.